Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chair Khan, for joining us today. And also thank you for mentioning your work on PBM reform in your opening statement. This is a very important issue for our healthcare industry and, as you pointed out, for the health of our constituents. This Congress, I've been working with a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers to address abusive and exclusionary pricing practices by pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. Access to affordable prescription drugs is a critical issue for all Americans, and I'm hopeful that the FTC will take substantive steps to address the ways in which PBMs take advantage of patients and providers in their pricing strategies. I know that you got a general question from Congresswoman Dean a little bit earlier, but to be much more specific, the FTC has been working on a 6B study since June of 2022. When do you anticipate completing that study, and do you have any interim conclusions or findings that you can share with us today?
Thanks, Congresswoman. As I noted, we recognize very deeply the urgency of this work because it potentially means that patients are not getting access to affordable medicines, and that, as we all know, can have life or death consequences. So we're moving with great haste. We're dependent on the companies to provide us information in a timely way. We're trying to drive that forward as much as we can in general. Historically, some of these studies at the agency have taken 4 years, 5 years. My goal is for us to be able to move more expeditiously. I should also note that if, as a matter of course, during this inquiry, we instead identified practices that we would determine are unlawful, nothing would stop us from being able to focus on some of those law violations and proceed on the enforcement track instead.
Great. And then also the FTC recently expanded the scope of its PBM investigation to include group purchasing organizations, or GPOs, that have opened in recent years. How does the FTC believe that PBMs might be using these GPOs, and what kind of harm could they have in the market for affordable drugs?
So GPOs are another one of these kind of entities that are not visible to consumers but play a really central middleman role in the market. We've sent out these additional requests because we want to make sure that we're getting a full 360 view of what's happening with these practices. I should also note we've all read stories about major shortages of critical drugs. We've also received letters and input suggesting that the role of the GPOs may also be contributing to some of those shortages of essential medicines. So that's something that's on our radar as well. Great.
And that given that the three large PBMs are currently, currently control 80% of the market, I'm interested in how consolidation within the PBM industry affects patient access and costs. In addition to this PBM consolidation, the largest drug plan sponsors also own their own PBMs. So we're seeing a great deal of vertical integration as well. We know that PBMs set out to pocket costs based on full, undiscounted list price of drugs, so patients don't see a lot of the PBM discounts at the pharmacy counter. And we know that some health plan-owned PBMs require patients to fill prescriptions only at certain pharmacies or providers, which reduces access. How are you seeing this consolidation and vertical integration impacting patients?
Yeah, it's such a great point, and this is one of the issues on which we're routinely hearing from people. We opened a docket to kind of collect input around what people are seeing about PBM practices. We received thousands of public comments, many of them from patients who were concerned that some of these decisions about which medicines the PBMs are putting on the formulary or are not putting on is not being driven by what's best for the patient, but is instead potentially being driven by which is going to give the PBM the highest rebate. So I think that could be an instance where there's a conflict of interest between what's in the PBM's own interest and what's best for patients. So that's something that we've heard a lot about.
And final quick question. Do you see a role for Congress in this area as well, not just what your agency does?
Absolutely. I mean, this is such an urgent problem relating to unaffordable drug prices for Americans that I think it's an all-hands-on-deck moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from